The throne room smelled like smoke and old blood. Master Sergeant Darian Voss stood near the far wall with his rifle low and his eyes moving. He counted exits. He counted bodies. He counted the Velkari soldiers still standing, 12 of them, all loyal to the dead emperor, all trying very hard not to look afraid. They were failing. The emperor had died 3 hours ago. A heart that had beaten for 200 Velkari years simply stopped. No warning, no enemy blade, just silence and then chaos. Word had spread through the palace like fire through dry grass, and now every faction with an army was moving. Darian had heard the distant rumble of warships breaking atmosphere before he even entered the building. He was not supposed to be here. His orders were simple: escort duty. The Terran Expeditionary Corps had signed a treaty with the Velkari Empire 4 years ago, a small clause, buried in the middle of 100 pages of trade agreements. It said that in the event of a succession crisis, 1 unit of Terran soldiers would be made available as a neutral escort for the recognized heir. Nobody at command thought the clause would ever matter. The Empire was stable. The Emperor was healthy. Then the Emperor died, and Darian's name was on the rotation list. He had arrived with 8 soldiers. That was all the treaty required. 8 humans on a world that held millions of Velkari, in a palace being slowly surrounded by rebel forces. His squad had looked at each other when they landed and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. Now Darian stood in the throne room and watched the last living heir to the Velkari Empire try to hold himself together. Kael'vas was young. By human measure, he might have looked like a teenager, tall and thin, with the pale silver skin of Velkari royalty and eyes the color of deep water. He stood near the Emperor's empty chair with his hands at his sides and his chin up, and if Darian had not been watching carefully, he might have believed the composure was real. But the hands were trembling, just slightly, just enough. The boy's last guardian, a veteran soldier named Thale, had taken a blade meant for Kael'vas during the ambush in the corridor outside. Thale was on the floor now. A Velkari medic was beside him, but everyone in the room already knew it was too late. The 12 remaining soldiers looked at Kael'vas and then looked away. Not out of disrespect, out of uncertainty. Without the Emperor, without Thale, the chain of command had a hole in it large enough to fly a ship through. They did not know who to take orders from. They did not know if following the Successor would get them killed in the next hour. Darian understood loyalty. He also understood fear. He had seen both in enough places to know the difference between a soldier who would hold and a soldier who would run. These 12 were about 30 seconds from running. The doors at the far end of the hall shook. Someone on the other side was testing them, not knocking, testing, feeling for weak points. The rebel forces were close and they were not coming to talk. Darian looked at Kael'vas. The young heir was staring at Thale's body. His mouth was pressed into a thin line. His water-colored eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. Darian made a decision. He crossed the room in 12 steps. He did not run. Running would have looked like panic, and panic was contagious. He walked with his boots firm on the stone floor and his shoulders straight, and when he reached the center of the room, in full view of every Velkari soldier present, he stopped. He lowered himself onto one knee. The room went completely still. Even the sound from behind the doors seemed to fade for a moment. Darian kept his eyes on Kael'vas and spoke clearly, in Velkari, the words he had memorized from a cultural briefing file that most soldiers in his unit had skipped entirely. Velkara Sath, Main Thale, Velkara Sath on Kael. I am your shield, I am your blade, I am your shield until the last breath. The Iron Shield Oath. It was the oldest military pledge in Velkari history. Soldiers had spoken it to kings for 1,000 years. It was sacred in a way that most modern Velkari had stopped believing in, the kind of sacred that lived in the bones rather than the mind. You did not speak those words lightly. You did not speak them at all unless you meant every single one. No human had ever spoken them. The idea had never occurred to anyone, because no human had ever been in a position to. Until now. The 12 soldiers did not move. They stared at Darien with expressions he could not fully read: shock, certainly, disbelief, something else underneath, older and harder to name. Kael'va stared at him too. "You know what those words mean," the young heir said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Darien said. His knee was still on the floor, he did not get up. "If you speak them, you cannot take them back. Not in our law, not in any law." "I know. You could die." Darien looked at him steadily. "That was already possible before I walked in here." Kael'va searched his face for something, some sign of doubt, or calculation, or the kind of political maneuvering that everyone around him had been doing for years. He did not find any of it. What he found instead was a human soldier kneeling on a cold stone floor in a burning palace, looking at him like the answer was very simple. "Why?" Kael'va asked. His voice was quiet. "You don't know me, this is not your empire, these are not your people." Darien thought about it for exactly 1 second. "You needed someone too," he said. Behind them the doors cracked. Not broke, cracked, just enough to show that the people outside were serious. The 12 Valkyrie soldiers moved, not toward the exit this time, toward Kael'va's. One by one they shifted, turning to face the doors, forming a line. Something had changed in the room. Something small but solid. The way a single stone dropped into still water changes everything in circles spreading outward. A human had knelt. A human had spoken words older than the Terran space program. And none of them, not the soldiers, not the heir, not the medic still kneeling beside Thal's body, could quite explain why that changed things. But it did. Darien rose from his knee and turned toward the cracking doors. He raised his rifle and checked the charge. Behind him, he heard Kael'va take one slow breath and then stand straighter than he had all evening. "Sergeant," Kael'va said. "Sir, what do we do now?" Darien looked at the doors. Then he looked back over his shoulder at the air, at the 12 soldiers behind him, at the room full of people who had not yet run. "We move," he said, "and we don't stop." The ship they stole was small, old, and smelled like engine grease, and something that Corporal Jaiho Sung described as burnt regret. It was a Valkyrie courier vessel, built for speed, not comfort, with a crew cabin barely large enough for 4 people and a cargo hold that now held 9 humans, 1 alien heir, and enough tension to power a small city. The hyperspace drive was damaged. 2 of the 4 thrusters were running at half capacity. The navigation system displayed star charts that were 8 years out of date. Darien stood at the front of the ship next to the pilot, Private Akafer, and looked at the blinking warning lights on the console like they were old friends he was not happy to see. "Can we jump?" he asked. Akafer tilted his head. "We can try." "That's not the same thing." "No," Akafer agreed, "it is not." They jumped anyway. The ship shuddered through the fold like a man walking through a wall, loud, wrong, and somehow successful on the other side. They came out in empty space between systems, which was exactly where Darien wanted to be. No rebel ships, no signals on the scanner, just stars and silence and the soft sound of Jaiho already pulling panels off the navigation console before the jump had fully finished. Kael'va watched all of this from the back of the crew cabin. He had been watching the humans since they left the throne world. Quietly, carefully, with the focused attention of someone who had been told all his life that he understood these creatures and was now beginning to suspect that he understood nothing at all. His education files had called humans fragile, short lifespans, soft bodies, high emotional output, which the files described as a weakness, a tendency toward irrational behavior driven by feeling rather than logic. The files recommended patience when dealing with them and suggested avoiding situations that might cause what the files called human emotional escalation. He watched Jai-Ho Sung pull apart a navigation computer that was older than his grandmother's memory banks, hum something under his breath, and begin rebuilding it with components from 3 different broken pieces of equipment and a roll of something the humans called tape, silver tape, adhesive, primitive, absolutely not rated for use in spacecraft systems. Jai-Ho finished, powered the system on, and it worked. Kael'vas stared at the updated star chart on the screen. Then he looked at the tape. Then he looked at Jai-Ho, who was already moving on to the next broken thing. "That should not work," Kael'vas said. Jai-Ho glanced up. "Probably not, but it does so." He shrugged and kept working. That was the first moment. The second came 6 hours later. One of the Valkyrie soldiers who had followed them from the throne room, a large veteran named Rael, had reached his limit. 3 of his brothers-in-arms were dead. His emperor was gone. He was on a stolen ship going somewhere he did not know, taking orders from a human, following a successor who had never commanded anything more than a study room. Rael stood up in the cargo hold and said loudly that he was done, that he wanted off the ship at the next station, that he did not answer to aliens, and he did not answer to children, and he would not pretend otherwise. He was a large soldier. He was angry. Several of the other Valkyrie looked like they were considering agreeing with him. Darien was busy with the thruster problem. He did not go back to the cargo hold. Private Lena Marsh did. She was 26 years old. She was the smallest person on the ship. She walked into the cargo hold alone, without a weapon visible, and she sat down on a crate across from Rael and she looked at him. Not the way someone looks at a problem, the way someone looks at a person. "Tell me about them," she said. "The ones you lost." Rael stared at her. "What?" "Your brothers, tell me their names. Tell me one thing about each of them." Silence. Long enough that Kael'vas, watching from the doorway, was certain the soldier was going to shout or push or do something that would make the next hour very difficult. Instead, Rael sat back down. He started talking. He talked for 40 minutes. Lena said almost nothing. She listened with her full body, leaning slightly forward, nodding, asking one small question at a time when Rael's voice slowed down. By the time he finished, the fury in his face had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It had become something heavier and sadder and much less dangerous. "We keep going," Rael said finally, not to Lena, to himself. "Yeah," she said quietly, "we do." She got up, nodded once and walked back to her post. Kael'vas stepped aside to let her pass. She gave him a small nod as she went by, the same easy nod she might give anyone in a corridor, as if she had not just done something that a trained Valkyrie mediator might have spent 2 days attempting. He did not sleep that night. He stayed in the crew cabin and watched the humans rotate through their duties without being told. Watched them check on each other in quiet moments. A hand on a shoulder, a cup of something hot passed across the cabin, a joke told badly on purpose to make someone laugh who did not want to. Watched HFY fly the damaged ship for 32 straight hours and refuse every offer of relief until Darien ordered him to rest. Not asked, ordered. And even then HFY sat down with one eye still on the instruments. On the second day, Kael'vas approached Darien. "Your people," he said, "the files I was given, they described you as emotionally unstable." Darien considered this. "We have our moments." "I do not think unstable is the right word." Darien looked at him sideways. "What word would you use?" Kael'vas thought about Jai-Ho and his tape. He thought about Lena and 40 minutes of listening. He thought about HFY's tired, stubborn eyes still watching the instruments. "Relentless," he said. Darien made a small sound, not quite a laugh, something drier and more tired than a laugh. "Yeah," he said, "that one fits better." They flew on through enemy space, through scanner sweeps and close calls, and 2 moments where Darien's voice went very flat and very calm in the way that Kael'vas was beginning to learn meant things were about to get serious. Each time, The squad moved without argument, without panic, without the hesitation that Kael'vas had seen in trained Valkyrie units when unexpected orders arrived. They moved like they trusted the person giving the orders completely. Kael'vas thought about the throne room, about a human kneeling on cold stone and speaking ancient words in a language that was not his own, because someone needed him to. He was starting to understand that the kneeling had not been a performance. It had not been politics. It had not been strategy. It had simply been true. And he was beginning to understand, slowly, uncomfortably, in the way that real understanding always arrives, that he had never in his life been given something true without a cost attached to it. He was not sure what to do with that. But he kept watching, and the humans kept going. Murath's cradle was not a beautiful station. It was built into the shell of a dead asteroid, bolted together over 2 centuries by a dozen different species who all needed a place where nobody asked questions. The docking bays smelled like fuel and frying food, and the particular kind of desperation that lives in places where law is more of a suggestion than a rule. Ships of every make sat in rows, some legal, some not, most somewhere in the middle. Darien had been here once before, years ago, on a job he wasn't supposed to talk about. He knew which corridors to avoid and which vendors to trust and where the exits were. That knowledge was worth more than weapons right now. They docked quietly, changed the ship's identification codes twice, and moved into the station in 2 separate groups. Kael'vas wore a hood and said nothing. Rael, who was large enough to draw attention, walked in the 3rd group with Lena and 2 other soldiers, spaced out enough to look like strangers. They found a room. One room large enough for all of them if nobody complained about personal space, and none of them did. Darien paid in untraceable credit chips, the kind that took 3 hours to trace even if someone was actively trying. For 18 hours nothing happened. Then Admiral Thesavik made his broadcast. It came through every public channel on the station at the same time, a wideband signal, the kind that cost serious money to push this far from Valkyrie space. Thesavik's face filled screens in every bar, every corridor, every docking bay on Murath's cradle. He was a tall Valkyrie with a long military record, and the kind of face that had stopped showing doubt sometime around his 40th year of service. He spoke for 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes he offered a number that made several species in the station briefly stop what they were doing and do the math. The bounty on Kael'vas was enormous, enough to buy a ship, several ships, enough to retire on for most of the people in this station 3 times over. Darien watched the broadcast from the corner of their rented room and said nothing for a long moment. "How long do we have?" Jaiho asked. "Before someone on this station makes a call, maybe 4 hours, maybe less if someone already recognized us coming in. So we need to move." "We need to move smart," Darien said. "Moving fast and moving smart aren't always the same thing." He pulled up the station map on a small handheld screen and started working the problem. Jaiho leaned over his shoulder and started working it alongside him without being asked. The same way he did everything, quietly, already 3 steps into a solution before anyone else had finished understanding the question. They had a plan in 40 minutes. It wasn't a good plan. It was the best available plan, which was a different thing entirely. The problem came from the direction nobody expected. They were moving through the lower corridors, service tunnels, low light, the kind of path that exists on every station for maintenance workers and people who don't want to use the main halls. Darien was at the front. Kael'vas was in the middle. The squad was tight and quiet and moving well. The attackers came from a side corridor, not from behind, not from ahead. From the side, through a door that should have been a storage room. 6 of them professional, not station thugs. Bounty hunters already tipped off, already positioned. They had been waiting. The first 4 seconds were very loud. Darien moved left to push Kael'vas behind him, which was the right instinct and the wrong position, because moving left put him in the direct line from the side door. He took the shot that was meant to go past him. It hit him in the left side, under the armor plate, in the gap that every infantry soldier knows exists and hopes nobody ever finds. He went down on one knee. Not all the way, one knee. Hand on the wall, rifle still up. He kept shooting. He kept giving orders. His voice did not change in volume or tone, which the squad responded to because a calm voice in a firefight is the most important sound in the world, and they all knew it, and they finished the engagement in 11 more seconds. When it was quiet, Lena was already beside him. "Talk to me," she said. "I'm fine." "Darian." "I'm fine, Lena, we need to." "You're bleeding through the armor." He looked down. She was right, the kind of right that ends arguments. They moved him to a side room. The Valkyrie medic, a young soldier named Civ who had been very quiet for most of the journey, opened his kit and looked at the wound and did not say anything for a moment. The silence was a kind of answer. Kaelva stood in the doorway and watched Civ work. "How bad?" he asked. Civ kept working. "The shot caught the inner tissue. There is damage to—" He stopped, switched to simpler words. "It is serious. I can slow it. I cannot stop it with what I have here." "Days." Civ was quiet. "Days," Kaelva said again, flat, not a question now. "Perhaps, with proper Valkyrie medical equipment, possibly longer, but we do not have." "I know what we have." Kaelva stepped into the room. He looked at Darian, who was sitting against the wall looking back at him with an expression that was irritated and tired and not frightened, which was somehow the most distinctly human thing Kaelva had seen yet. The man had been shot badly enough to kill him in a matter of days, and his primary expression was mild annoyance. "I need everyone to leave this room," Kaelva said. Lena looked at him. "Absolutely not." "Please," he turned to her, "please, 5 minutes." She looked at Darian. Darian nodded once small. She left. The others followed. Civ was the last out, and he hesitated in the doorway. "What I have will not fix this," Civ said quietly, looking at Kaelva. "I know," Kaelva said. "I have something else." When they were alone, Kaelva sat down on the floor across from Darian. He put his hands on his own chest, over his sternum, and he breathed slowly. Something shifted in his posture, not physical exactly, but present, like a door opening inside him. "My people carry something," he said, "passed from the old emperor to the heir at birth. The old texts call it the architect's gift. It can repair living tissue, rewrite damage at the smallest level." Darian looked at him. "How long have you had this and not mentioned it?" "It has never been relevant before." "It's relevant now." "Yes," Kaelva met his eyes, "but it has never been used on a human. Every advisor I have ever had would tell me the biology is incompatible, that it would kill you." Darian was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" Kaelva looked at his own hands, at the faint luminescence in his palms that only appeared when the gift was near the surface. He thought about the right answer, and then he thought about the honest one, and then he said the honest one. "I think you will die without it. I think there is a chance you will die with it. I think I cannot watch you die without trying." He paused. "You knelt on a cold floor and pledged your life for mine when you had no reason to. You did it because I needed someone to." Darian said nothing. "This is me," Kaelva said quietly, "because you need someone to." The room was very still. Darian uncrossed his arms. "All right," he said. Kaelva pressed his palms forward and closed his eyes. And the architect's gift, for the first time in 1,000 years of history, reached out and touched something it had never touched before. The first thing Darian noticed when he woke up was that he could hear the station's air system. Not feel it, not sense the faint draft from the vents the way you do when a room gets stuffy. Hear it, every individual fan blade turning. The rhythm of the pressure pumps 3 levels above. the faint whistle of a seal that was slightly loose in the duct on the far wall. He lay still and listened to all of it and thought, calmly and clearly, that should not be possible. He opened his eyes. The room was the same room. Lena was asleep in the corner. Jai-Ho was sitting against the opposite wall with a small device in his hands, not working on it, just holding it, the way someone holds something when they are waiting and trying not to show it. Siv the medic was beside the door. He was not asleep. None of them had left. Jai-Ho saw him first. He looked up, and for a moment his face did exactly nothing, which was a very Jai-Ho thing. All his reactions lived about 3 seconds behind his expression. Then something shifted, and he set the device down very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands are not entirely steady. "Hey," Darian said. His own voice surprised him. It was clear and even. He had expected to sound rough. He had been unconscious for what he could tell was at least several hours, possibly longer, and before that he had been shot badly enough that a trained medic had not bothered hiding how serious it was. He sat up. No pain, not reduced pain, not pain that was manageable, no pain. Lena woke up at the sound of movement. She looked at him the way you look at something you are not certain is real yet. She stood up and crossed the room and pressed 2 fingers against his wrist, checking pulse, old habit, and then she pulled back and looked at her own fingers as if they had lied to her. "Your heart rate," she said. "Is it bad?" "It's perfect. It's Darian, it's better than perfect." Siv came forward and stopped a meter away, studying him with the focused, slightly overwhelmed expression of someone whose understanding of biology was being rearranged in real time. He held up a scanner, passed it slowly from head to chest to abdomen, and read the results twice. "The wound is gone," Siv said. "Good." "You do not understand what I am saying." Siv lowered the scanner. "The wound is gone, the tissue, the damaged vessels, the internal impact, all of it, not healed, not scarred over, gone as if it was never there." He paused. "And there are other changes." "What kind of changes?" "Your cellular structure. It is, I do not have the right word in your language, denser, more layered. The gift rewrites tissue at a molecular level, Sergeant, and what it should have done with your human biology is—" He stopped again, searching for the word. "It should have failed. It was not designed for your species. It was not designed for anything like your species." But your body did not simply accept the gift. It responded to it, actively." Siv shook his head slowly. "The gift attempted to rewrite your tissue according to its original design, and your biology it pushed back, not to reject it, to negotiate with it, to take what was useful and fold it into structures that were already there." He looked at the scanner, then at Darian, then back at the scanner. "I have been a medic for 19 years. I have never seen anything like this." Kael'vas was in the doorway. He had been there for at least a minute, listening. When Darian looked over, the Successor's expression was a careful, guarded version of something that might have been relief, or wonder, or both things at once wearing the same face. "You're awake," Kael'vas said. "Apparently." "I thought," he stopped. "I was not certain it would work." "It worked," Darian said. He rolled his left shoulder. "It moved easily, no restriction, no pull from old scar tissue. More than worked from the sound of it." Kael'vas stepped into the room fully. He looked at Siv's scanner, then at the medic's face, reading the results in the expression before he read them in the data. "Show me," he said. Siv handed it over. Kael'vas looked at the readout for a long time. Something moved in his face, not quite shock, because shock was too fast and too surface level for what this was. This was deeper. This was the feeling of a wall you had believed in your whole life developing a crack that kept getting wider. "The gift has existed for 1,000 years, he said quietly. "It was used on thousands of Valkyrie soldiers. The results were always consistent, controlled, predictable." He lowered the scanner. "It has never done this." "What exactly has it done?" Darian asked. "It has made you something that does not have a name yet." Kael'vas looked at him directly. Stronger, faster, I would estimate, senses enhanced. The cellular density Civ mentioned means your body will resist damage that would have been serious before. He paused. But it is not simply the gift. You did not just receive it. Your biology integrated it, modified it, made it something new. Lena let out a slow breath. Of course it did. Everyone looked at her. She shrugged. We've been adapting to hard things for 100,000 years. That's the whole story of us. Something tries to break our biology, and our biology figures out a way to use it instead. She glanced at Darien. I'm not surprised. Jaiho tilted his head, maybe slightly surprised. Slightly, she agreed. Kael'vas was quiet for a moment. Then, Admiral Thesavik will hear about this. The mood in the room shifted, not into fear, into the particular kind of focus that comes when a problem becomes very clear. Your analysis, Darien said. He is already moving faster than we anticipated. The bounty was a warning. It means he knows we are not dead and he is not certain where we are. When he learns what happened to you, he will accelerate further. Not because of what you are now, though that will concern him. Kael'vas set down the scanner. Because of what it means. If the architect's gift works on humans, if it can be given to humans, then the balance of power in this region of space changes completely. Thesavik has built his entire position on the assumption that the Velkari military is the dominant force. If humans can carry the gift, that assumption is no longer safe. So he'll move to destroy you before that becomes real, Darien said. Before it becomes real, Kael'vas confirmed. Yes. Darien stood up, all the way steadily, without using the wall. He did not realize until he was upright that standing had never felt quite like this before, not wrong, not unnatural, just more, clearer, like a dial that had been turned up one level on everything. He looked at Kael'vas. Then we stop waiting and we move first, he said. Kael'vas straightened, not the careful, maintained posture of a young heir trying to look composed, something more natural, more decided, a choice settling into his spine. Yes, he said. In the corridor outside the room, Rael was already standing guard. He had heard everything through the thin wall and had said nothing. When Darien stepped out, Rael looked at him for a long moment, at the easy way he moved, at the absence of the wound that had been visible in his side just hours before, and gave a small nod. No words. Velkari soldiers were not always wordy people. But the nod meant something. It meant, I see what you are now. I don't have a word for it, but I know which side you're on and it's mine. Darien nodded back. Get everyone ready, he said. We have a throne to take back. The throne world looked different from orbit this time. The last time Darien had seen it, it had been burning in 3 places and surrounded by rebel warships moving into position. Now it was burning in fewer places, which should have been better, but the reason it was burning in fewer places was that Thesavik had consolidated. He had stopped fighting on multiple fronts and pulled everything inward, toward the capital, toward the palace. He had given up the outer cities because he did not need them. He only needed one thing. The throne itself, and whoever sat in it when the dust settled. The coalition that arrived with Kael'vas was not what anyone had expected. The Terran Expeditionary Corps had sent a rapid response fleet, not a large one, but fast, with the kind of firepower that made people recalculate quickly. The call for it had gone out from Darien's squad during their time on Murath's cradle, sent through channels that were supposed to be low priority, and had been treated as anything but the moment word got back to Earth that one of their sergeants had sworn an ancient alien oath on behalf of an alien heir. The media had gotten hold of it before the military did, which meant the political machinery moved faster than usual, which meant the fleet arrived faster than anyone had planned for. Alongside the Terran ships were Velkari loyalist vessels, older, some of them, but crewed by soldiers who had served the old emperor and had been waiting for something worth fighting for. They had heard about the human who knelt. They had heard about what happened on Murath's cradle. They had heard about a successor who, instead of calculating political advantages, had put his hands on a dying foreign soldier in a back room because the man had needed help. That story traveled faster than the fleet did. Neutral factions came too. Not many. Neutrality is a habit that is hard to break, but enough to matter on the edges of the fight, closing lanes and blocking routes that Thesavik had assumed would stay open. The battle for the throne world took 11 hours. Darien fought in the second wave, on the ground, moving through the palace districts in the kind of corridor combat that is loud and fast, and decided by individual decisions made in half a second with no room to revisit them. He moved differently than he had before Murath's cradle. Not so differently that the squad found it wrong. They adjusted in the easy way that soldiers adjust to changes in a person they trust, but differently enough that the enemies they encountered in those corridors made a mistake they would not have made against an ordinary human. They assumed he would slow down. He did not slow down. 3 times in 11 hours, Rael fought beside him, and 3 times Rael said nothing about what he was seeing. And once, in a brief quiet moment between 2 engagements, Rael said simply, "Good," and moved on, which from Rael was a speech. Lena coordinated from a rear position, comms, movement, the constant management of information that keeps a ground operation from becoming a confused disaster. Jai-Ho was with her, running numbers on defensive positions, finding the gaps in Thesavik's layout before Thesavik's own people found them. Akeffer flew the air support. Private Marsh, a different Marsh, the younger one, the one everyone called Marsh II to avoid confusion, held a corridor for 40 minutes alone with a damaged weapon, and what he later described as determination and bad luck in equal amounts. Kael'vas was in the third wave. His advisors had not wanted him anywhere near the ground. His advisors had presented arguments that were logical, well-organized, and entirely correct, and Kael'vas had listened to every word of them, and then said no, and followed Darien's squad through the outer palace gates with his hood down and his face visible, which was the point. People saw him. Soldiers on both sides saw the Successor walking through the fight on foot, no shield formation around him, just moving forward with the human squad and his own small guard, and the effect of that was not immediately dramatic. Real life is not a story, and no army simply stops because of an image. But it shifted something, quietly and irreversibly, the way all real shifts happen. Thesavik's forces began to fracture at the edges 3 hours before the main engagement ended. The admiral himself did not fracture. He was waiting in the throne room when they arrived: Darien, Kael'vas, Rael, Lena, Jai-Ho, the remaining squad, and a small group of Velkari loyalists who had taken the inner corridors from the east side. Thesavik stood near the throne with a small personal guard and an expression that had passed through every stage of anger and arrived somewhere beyond it, in the cold, flat territory that very dangerous people occupy when they have accepted a bad outcome and are deciding how to shape it. He looked at Kael'vas. He looked at Darien beside him. His gaze stayed on Darien for a moment longer. "A child and a human," he said. "That is what this empire comes to." "An heir and a friend," Kael'vas said. "There is a difference. Friends do not win wars." "We're here, aren't we?" Darien said. Thesavik looked at him the way that people look at problems they once believed were minor. Something behind his eyes was doing the math, recalculating, arriving at a number that did not match what he had planned for. He had heard the reports from Murath's cradle. He had called them exaggerated. Looking at Darien now, he was reassessing that conclusion. "You changed him," Thesavik said to Kael'vas. "Not accusation, observation. You used the gift on a human." "Yes." "Do you understand what that means? What that will invite? Every species with ambitions will." "I understand," Kael'vas said. "I also understand that this man was dying because he stood between me and a blade. The question of what it invites was secondary." He paused. "I learned that from him. Some things are just true. The cost is secondary. Thesavik looked between them for a long moment. The fight, when it came, was brief. Thesavik was a military man to his last second, and he did not simply surrender, but the numbers were settled and everyone in the room could count. When it was over, he was in custody alive, which Kael'vas had specifically ordered, because Kael'vas was not his father and he was not Thesavik, and he intended from the very first day to rule differently than either of them. The throne room was quiet. Kael'vas stood in the center of it for a moment, the same room where, weeks ago, he had stood over Thale's body and tried to hold himself together while everything collapsed. It looked the same. It smelled the same, stone and old ceremony, and the particular cold of a room with very high ceilings. The throne was still there. He turned to the assembled room before he sat in it. "There is a title in our law," he said, "that has not been used in 400 years. First Shield of the Empire. It was retired when the Empire decided it no longer needed what the title meant." He looked at Darian. "I am reinstating it." There was no ceremony, no prepared words. He said Darian's name and the title together in Velkari, and then he said it again in Standard, so there was no question about who he meant or why. Darian stood in the middle of the throne room in armor that had been through 11 hours of corridor fighting and said nothing for a moment. "Then I'm still a sergeant." "You are both," Kael'vas said. Darian looked at him. Some silent conversation passed in the space between them, the kind that happens between people who have shared enough hours in enough bad rooms that words become redundant. He nodded. 3 weeks later, the diplomatic office on Earth received a communication. Then another. Then 7 more over the following month, from species across the region who had been watching very carefully and had drawn their own conclusions. The messages varied in length and formality, but all contained, somewhere in their body, a version of the same question. They asked about the humans. They asked about loyalty. They asked whether, under certain agreed conditions, Terran personnel might be available for protective arrangements similar to those recently demonstrated. Earth's diplomatic office forwarded the messages to the Expeditionary Corps. The Corps forwarded them to a general, who read them all twice and then sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about a sergeant who had memorized an ancient alien oath from a cultural briefing file that everyone else had skipped. He thought about tape on a navigation console. He thought about a young private talking a grieving soldier down from the edge with 40 minutes of listening. He thought about human bodies that refused to follow the rules even at the molecular level. He approved the program. And somewhere on a rebuilt throne world, in an office adjacent to the Imperial Chambers, Darian Voss read the same news on a small screen and allowed himself one quiet moment of something that was not quite pride and not quite amusement, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Then he went back to work. Because there was always more work, and someone had to do it.